I'm an engineer. I finished graduate school a couple of years ago, and my career goal is to do research and possibly eventually become a professor of engineering.
What kind of engineer are you?
I am an electrical engineer. So, electrical engineers are primarily interested in harnessing electrical energy, and they can be applied for two specific purposes. The first being, as you might guess, as I said, electrical energy is a very versatile form of energy. So once you take energy in other forms, such as fossil fuels or coal or wind energy or solar or any of that, and convert it to electricity, you can transmit it over large distances, and it's a very versatile form of energy. So you can use it for all kinds of you know utilities, and it's an important um, building block of the modern infrastructure for societies all over the world. The other main application of electrical engineering is to use electricity to transmit information, to encode information, and store it and in various forms. You can manipulate small amounts of electrical energy to store information and use it in communications. You can use it to uh, control all kinds of little devices. Sure. For instance, you could have a hydroelectric dam that harnesses energy stored in moving water, for instance, which can move a turbine, and then you can use a turbine to turn an electrical generator, and that will produce electricity. And once you've converted energy into electricity, you can transmit it uh, using power lines over very large distances, and then you can also store it if you need to. We have lots of advancements in recent years with battery technology. So that's the primary means of storage. There are other types of temporary storage. Capacitors are a good example of that. Some people may have heard these terms. I'm using a few um, tech terms here, but yeah, that's the primary way of generating energy. I just gave the example of hydroelectric power. There's also windmills. There are solar um, cells. Solar cells basically take energy from the sun, and they have little um, semiconductor devices called photoelectric cells, which convert light into electricity. So whenever a photon hits a photoelectric cell, it energizes electrons in the device, and they come out the other end of the device, and you can transmit those. And if you need to store them in a battery or a rechargeable battery, for instance, and then reuse that energy later.
Cool. Okay, that was an excellent example of some of the jargon that will be very familiar to scientists, but not as familiar to person on the street. Tell me, what is a photon and why are photons important?
All right, photon is the most basic unit of light. It's there are two interpretations of how to look at light, and some people may know that you can, on the one hand, think of light as a stream of particles, which is a perfectly valid way of looking at it. It's also possible to think of it as a bunch of waves traveling through space. Um, that's somewhat less intuitive in some ways, but it's also a perfectly valid way of looking at it. And turns out both models are very accurate and provide all of the observed results. They help confirm them. And so it just depends on which mathematical model works in a particular situation. So you can model light, as I said, both as electromagnetic waves and also as a stream of particles. And a photon um, is used to describe the particle uh, model of light, and it's the most basic unit of light. Well, to start with, I was always interested in science from a very young age. I can think all the way back to when I was 8 or 9, and I just seemed to be fascinated by the kinds of things scientists do. And I came across this book. Uh, it was at the library. It was a children's book, but it was about some famous scientists through different eras. Starting with Greek philosophers and like Aristotle and Plato and all of these people, Archimedes and all of these, all the way to the Middle Ages and beyond, the Renaissance era, and then also some of the modern scientists. So I just read about these people and I just found it fascinating. And then when I was about 9, I think my father brought me an electrical hobby kit almost. It was almost like a toy, really, as a present. And soon after that, after seeing how much I was into it, he also bought me an electronics hobby kit. So it had things like timers and buzzers and counters and stop clocks, all electronic, LEDs, LCD displays. I could just program to display whatever I wanted, that sort of thing, and a little keypad where you could push buttons and make it do things if you design the right circuit for it. So yeah, that's really how I got interested in engineering in particular, and went on to decide probably in middle school that I would probably become an electrical engineer. I was also interested in biology for a while, but yeah, I think the early exposure to electronic hobby kits really sealed the deal for me. Yes, yeah, that was another challenging aspect of my education, was just figuring out a pathway to getting a degree in engineering. When we uh, when I had finished high school in New Zealand, my parents were in the process of planning another move, this time to the United States. Um, and this kind of uh, interfered with some of my plans for higher education, um, because I had originally planned to apply to the University of Auckland in New Zealand. Um, but that wasn't really an option anymore. My parents preferred that I went with them, uh, came here to the U.S. with them. So what ended up happening was I had already missed the application deadlines at most universities. Also, the two moves that happened in quick succession. We were just we had only been in New Zealand a couple of years, so my parents had ended up spending a lot of money making that initial move, and then this second move to the United States. Uh, my dad was doing this because he found a much better and more stable job here in the United States. So um, there was this financial constraint to consider as well. So in addition to the fact that I couldn't apply to any major universities, we were forced to only look at community colleges. So I spent the first couple of years attending classes at community colleges, and then yeah, fortunately my academic uh, performance was good enough to allow me to transfer to a good 4-year university after that. So it ended up being much more economical, of course. But yeah, it prepared me well enough that I was able to transition into a 4-year program and then eventually get my bachelor's degree in engineering. At that point, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do in terms of whether I wanted to further my education or just work. I decided to spend a year working and see how that felt, and then see if I still wanted to continue studying. And so off I went and got a job. And it was a good experience overall, but I felt that I wasn't being challenged enough. I wasn't having quite as much fun as I was hoping. Um, I was making good money, but I wanted to really explore uh, my career options further, especially in the direction of maybe moving more toward research and not so much just product development and you know the marketing aspect of things. So that's when I decided I wanted to do graduate studies. But I was still not in a position financially. My parents really weren't going to fund my education anymore. So um, again, I had to think carefully. I couldn't really go to a research one type institution, a big university as of yet. So I decided to attend a local university in the Metro Detroit area and get a master's degree there. So that would be geared more toward an automotive uh, industry because that's where a lot of the graduates from that university go. But that again provided me with a good um, background, especially at the graduate level of doing research and what have you, mostly applied research. And during this process, I became more interested in delving into greater depth into the fundamentals of engineering. And I decided I really wanted to do more theoretical research. And I started looking at pursuing a PhD in electrical engineering. Um, but at the same time, my financial situation wasn't great, so I thought, okay, I'll take another break for another year and work during that time, make some more money, and set myself up financially for the final push to get a PhD. So while I was working, I just started applying to major research universities, and I got accepted into MSU and got a good offer. So I decided to come here, and luckily, uh, turned out I didn't have to spend a lot of that money I'd saved up because I got assistantships throughout my duration here at Michigan State.